Hello, everyone, and welcome to our new podcast series, Humanitarian Horizons, Christina DiArcangelo Unveiled. And with me, I have a guest on that you probably remember from season one, my friend and colleague, Dan. And we talked about some clinical research things last time, and he also had me on his podcast, and we talked about different things as it relates to clinical CRO site interactions and things of that nature. So welcome back, Dan. I'm so excited to have you on today.
Thank you for having me, Christina. It's a pleasure, and really inspired by the growth you've done for your personal brand and your company. And even in a 1 year, you've grown your audience pretty significantly. So big ups to you.
Thank you so much. Well, it's like because of people like you also that have me on your show, because I'll tell you what, when I was on your show, I got such an amazing response from your viewers and listeners. I even got an intern who came on board with Affinity Patient Advocacy, as you know, who found me through you and your podcast. And she was just entering college and she wants to study clinical research. So
Awesome.
I really appreciated you also having me on. It's a two-way street, in my opinion. And thank you so much. It's been a lot of work, but it's been so much fun. I've learned a lot about all these different things. And that's kind of why I decided to shut down the first podcast, was because now that I have unveiled myself, even though I used unveiled in the second one, I started kind of showing people not just the corporate side of Christina DiArcangelo, but the head and heart side, the empathy side, all those things that I'm concerned about, and showing people we are the same, which was our entire motto of that last podcast. I thought it was time to start getting into some of these nitty-gritty topics that we really need to talk about, and I'm not afraid to talk about them. So so today I want to talk to you more about clinical research from the humanitarian point of view, right? Rather than just the clinical side of things and how we enroll patients and things. But why are we here, right? The whole goal should be to help patients, right? And they are humans. So why aren't we talking more about that in the industry, do you think?
Well, because I think studies are designed to prove a hypothesis and to get drugs approved, devices approved in order to sell to patients. And so I don't think pharma treats a study participant the same way they treat a patient that's using their drugs once it's approved. I think they look at them as two very different things. Anyone who thinks that pharma actually cares about study participants should have participated in a study as a site when they tell you, they send a site-wide email saying enrollment has been met. Anyone that's in screening should be screen failed. Like, that should tell you everything you need right there. And the majority of the time that's the case. The minority of the time, they say those in screening are allowed to randomize if they qualify. I consider that good behavior, good practice, good patient centricity, but the majority of the time that's not the case.
So for people who are listening or viewing us, I just want to break it down to them so they understand what we're saying with screen failures. So what we're saying, what Dan's saying is the screen failure means you cannot enter into the clinical study as a subject because they completed their enrollment, which is their corporate enrollment milestone. So the company decided they're shutting down the enrollment, so you can't come into the study. So you have been, pre-screened, screened, all these things that you've gone through, and you're looking forward to this because you have hope in your heart that this product that you're getting, hopefully it's not a placebo study, but you're hoping that you're going to get the study drug and it's going to help your whatever the issue is, your ailment or otherwise. So they shut it down and now you can't participate. That is what Dan is trying to explain. So I wanted to make sure we were very careful about what that means so that people understand that these things happen. In case it happened to somebody who happened to be watching or listening to this podcast, they now understand what it meant when they said, from the clinical trial site side, that they couldn't participate.
Yeah, yeah. And there's this whole, I mean, there's so many sponsors out there. I could name the ones that I have good experiences with. Maybe that's a place to start and give some context. So Eli Lilly, I think, does a very good job of practicing what they preach. They really do try to get out to the underserved communities, get patients in these communities access to therapeutics in the form of research. And they're the biggest pharma company out there now, so they're planting seeds and they're looking to recoup on that investment. It's all an investment, but the majority of the sponsors don't. They look at clinical trials as a necessary evil, and the patients are literally numbers. And then when they design the IE criteria, they're not really thinking about how this is going to affect the general population. They're thinking about how the FDA is going to see the results. So they're really, when a pharma company or any sponsor designs a trial, their customer is the FDA. It's not the patients. That comes later, and that comes through marketing, and that's why they've hired all the sales reps and that kind of stuff. So clinical research, it's not always a microcosm of the general population. And that's been an issue with diversity in the past. This is why there's this huge push towards getting underserved participants into studies, Hispanics, Native Americans, African Americans, and the like, because the FDA has said we need more of that representation. Not because pharma wanted that, it's because the FDA said that. That's why there's
And
this push all of a sudden. It's not out of the
right.
goodness of their hearts.
No, and the thing is this, right? These different populations of people, their bodies genetically are different than the traditional Caucasian patients that come into these trials, right? So there's certain things that happen to, say, African American patients versus Caucasian, Asian, Indigenous, etc., right? So what happens right now in pharma and how the approval process works is that primarily it's the Caucasian population, right? If you look at the ads on TV, what do you really see on these ads, right? You don't see a lot of the different people that they should be, targeting, right? Even in the ads, it's mostly the Caucasian population.
Well,
So
lately that's changed. Lately it's gone the
yeah,
other way. They're like almost making up for it now by not
yes,
having Caucasians in the
I've
ads.
seen some of those, and I'm like, you didn't even study those people, so why are you having them in your ad, right?
Exactly.
You don't
Yep.
even know if it works for them properly. So that's the whole kit and caboodle here of this diversity population issue is the fact that we don't know if it's really going to help them in
hmm
the way that we think it's going to help them. And don't get me started on the pediatric pop. Having my own child, and prior to having my kid, when my parents were raising my nephew, I remember having those discussions with my mom, like, listen, mom, if they're going to put Christopher on XYZ, because I didn't live there, I was in Cali at the time, right? Make sure, mom, that they've done the actual studies and they're not using this off label, mom. They think that this might help. We've
Yeah.
got to make sure. And Christopher, unfortunately, had a lot of mental health things. So when he was a kid, they were putting him on all kinds of stuff. And I kept, I'd have to get on the phone, explain, hey, listen, I don't think this is a good idea. Do you know what this is? Do you know what this is? This is speed, mom. Like, I don't think, and so there's that issue also with the peds population because we don't do enough work in the pediatric space either.
We don't. I mean, that's nowhere. If there's all these problems in the adult studies, in the pediatrics, it's probably magnified by 10. And one of the reasons is the majority of sites won't do pediatric studies, mine included. We just won't do it. We haven't partnered with a pediatrician yet. And I don't know if it's something I would actually want to do. Um, especially with psych, honestly, Christina, I don't know how I feel about enrolling children into psychiatric trials. Like from a
Mhm.
philosophical standpoint and an ethical standpoint, it's just not a road I ever wanted to traverse in my career. And I'm okay staying off of that road too, because that's a lot of work. Even if you take the ethical considerations out, it's a lot of work on pediatric studies. And so not something I choose to do. And that, yeah, you're absolutely right in that regard.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch like as things have turned, right? Because COVID taught us that we could do a lot more work remotely, right? And we could get what we needed done remotely, which has been fantastic. But then it was almost like we didn't get anywhere though. You know what I mean? Like, where have we really gotten in all of this? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then we see things like Ozempic, right? That's come out and it's supposed to be for diabetes, and people are using
Novo,
it off.
yeah,
Yeah.
off label. And we're
They're
doing a
used
bunch of studies for that. Not necessarily with Ozempic, but with the other GLP ones. We're actually doing two studies right now. One is looking at cardiovascular outcomes. The other one is specifically for diabetics and weight loss. So there is a lot of promise in that space from the science side, but you're absolutely right with the off-label use completely out of control. And it's all cash, right? None of it's covered unless you have that diagnosis.
right. I don't know about you. Now, this is the thing that drives me crazy, right? Because we work in this FDA space, right? We're very careful about what we say, how we recruit our subjects, right? What do we do? Because you're on the site side, I'm on the
Hmm.
CRO side, right? So, and then the patient advocacy side, when we're running recruitment through that curve, we have to be so careful about what we say, what we do, how we present it. And there are ads popping up on my Instagram saying, do I want to get Ozempic for weight loss? Click on this whatever thing, which is basically an ePro, you know what I mean? And
Yeah,
they ask you questions, and I can get it from some doctor person, allegedly, that's just writing you scripts.
yeah.
How is this happening? How is this happening? How is this allowed? I remember when Do you remember when Kim Kardashian was pregnant with, I think it was the second child, I think it was Saint, and she went on Twitter and said that she was taking a certain medicine that her doctor prescribed. It was off label, but it was for nausea. She wasn't taking Zofran, it was something else.
Mhm.
So she went on Twitter and she was like, I'm so happy that my doctor helped me. I'm taking XYZ. And FDA reached out and said, take that down. You're making a claim. This is off-label usage. You can't do that. Okay, so
Mhm.
this was like 4 or 5 years ago, or I don't even know how.
And
This is
she got
exam.
paid for that post, by the way.
Yeah.
That's why they
So,
had the right to tell her to take it down.
so how is it that this is happening today? And I mean, I just saw it again. It's 2024 now. How is this happening where you can get Ozempic online for an off-label problem?
Well, one of them is, I don't know if it's Ozempic. One of them had recently gotten approved. I think there's two now of the GLPs that are approved for obesity.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's just obesity by itself or obesity with risk factors, but
Mm-hmm.
technically it might be legal. But to your point, they've been doing this long before it was legal, and it's almost like they're playing catch up with the studies now
Mm-hmm.
to to make up for because the studies are hard to do, and the
Mm-hmm.
studies are it's hard to get the patients, and they want to
Costs a
cherry
lot of
pick,
money.
cost money. They want to cherry pick the right patients to be in the study, not just diversity, but they want them basically healthy on all aspects except for the obesity, which is unusual. If you're
Mm-hmm.
obese, you're going to have other comorbidities most likely. If not now, eventually you will. So I feel like they were playing catch up and they saw the opportunity and then they went for the indication later.
Mm-hmm. Which is crazy, right? I mean, I
Mhm.
don't know. It's crazy to me. And I keep seeing these things. And then people will come into the nonprofit and ask us, APA, what do we think about these things? And we're like, it's not approved. Don't do it.
Mhm.
Like, I don't care if your neighbor down the street, this mom needed to lose the baby weight. And listen, I was there. I had a kid too.
Mhm.
But, you know, we've got to do this safely. We can't just do this stuff. And there's other alternatives out there for weight loss.
Yeah. Yeah. Just Ventramine and things like that have already gone through the FDA
Listen,
approval process.
I mean, I know about my struggle when I had got diagnosed with my autoimmune diseases in 18, and I was so like obese because of the thyroid, the Hashimoto.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to drop like 150 pounds, but it wasn't because I was taking something like Ozempic or something of that nature. It was because I found out what was wrong with the underlying condition that was causing it. We addressed it. I changed my diet. You know, I was doing what the heck is the one with the, I forget the one that it's high fat. I forget what that's called, that diet. I can't
Keto?
remember. Keto. Yep. I was doing keto. Then you can't do keto for too long, right? Because then you have problems. So you have to, with your cholesterol and other things.
Yeah.
So then I switched to an anti-inflammatory diet, right? No sugar, gluten-free. That's what I do now. And I also started taking cannabinoids. And that was before I started taking THC side and got my card legally through the state of
Mm-hmm.
Pennsylvania, where I reside. And I exercise a lot, you know, 7 days a week, I exercised. That was how I was able to lose my weight. So that's the other issue. It's like we also advertise these things like, oh, well, this is a one-hit wonder. Take the pill, drop the pounds. Don't worry about the side effect profile, the fact that you're nauseous and you can't hold anything down. And don't worry about the fact that now you're dehydrated because you're in the bathroom all the time because it's coming out of both ways.
Yeah. There's no such thing as a biological free lunch.
Mm-mm.
And I think people who haven't discovered that yet will at some point. And with that being said, I am a fan of these GLP-1s, at least so far from what we've seen.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point, this is why we do the studies, and this is why you can't take shortcuts, and why you've got to go through the clinical trial process, which is arduous. It's not meant to be
No.
from test tube to post-marketing trial, basically, and then work your way back. But somehow I think it has to do with the comorbidities and the diabetes and the hypercholesterolemia and all the other comorbidities that a lot of people have, that they were able to get away with it. Maybe. I'm not sure. We'd have to ask Darshan about that. We should do a pod with Darshan and GLP-1s because he can go like hours on that topic.
We should do a podcast with him on that, because that would be fun to talk about, because I know right into the sweet you know, besides talking about diverse populations of enrollment for our clinical studies, that's something else that he's very interested in, as we are on this podcast. It's nice that we have people like this, though, that we're all together in a community where we're like, wait a minute, this just doesn't seem right. What is going on? You know? And the thing is, we're brave enough to talk about it.
Yeah.
A lot of people are afraid to talk about it. And it's like, well, if we don't talk about it, how can we help people? People listen to our podcasts. They look to us because they know that we know certain things that might help them or a family member. And that was one of the things we discussed, because I had Darshan on this morning, as you know,
Yeah.
shooting. You know, he was my he was my opener. And we were talking about, I said, listen, that's somebody's mother or brother or father or whatever, right? Are we thinking about that when we're developing these studies? Are we thinking about how it's going to impact the family also for these patients? I don't think so.
No, I mean, who's we? You know, there's the pharma that their purpose is to maximize profits for shareholders. There's the clinicians who kind of do what they're told the majority of the time, or the ones that consider themselves patient advocates and custodians of patient care that do look outside the box for alternatives that go against the orthodoxy. And then there's research sites who follow protocols. Like that's what we do. So when you say we, and then there's the FDA, and I mean, we can get into hour-long discussions on that, but they're supposed to make sure everything's safe first, especially pharmaceuticals, and they're the ones supposed to be watching all this stuff.
And making sure we're doing what we're supposed to be doing and protecting the patients. At the end of the day, that's what we're supposed to be doing, is protecting people. And I know, you know, because I see your posts and I post stuff on and off. You know, we're seeing a lot of things that have been approved that now there's problems. You know, there's patients that are having issues with certain things that have been approved, say last year. And now what's going on now? We have, you know, heads of, from a governmental state level now saying, hey, listen, we don't think this stuff's working for these patients and you approved it. What are you going to do about it?
Right.
Attorney
And
generals.
one has to wonder about the regulatory capture in our industry, which is the highest of any other industry, which favors the biggest market cap companies.
Mhm.
And for those that don't know what regulatory capture is, just think of a revolving door between regulators and industry and jobs. And I'll leave it at that.
Mhm. Yeah, we could go down a path there too. But you know, it just kind of goes back to the whole point, right? Which is the human side of things. And we need to be more proactive with remembering that there's a human there that's coming to your site, right? And I know you guys, this is what you believe in. I mean, you guys are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Not every site's like you though, you know, it's like, hey, they get paid to enroll, they're enrolling because they're told to, and
I know
it, you
sites
know,
that will take any study. They don't care what the mechanism of action is. They don't even bother to look. Maybe the PIs would, but the PIs just sign off on all of it. I don't take any, personally, I don't take any trial I wouldn't put a family member in.
right,
And that's
right.
just the rule I have for myself. We get some questionable stuff thrown our way all the time. And luckily our PIs, all of them look at what type of drug is it, and they use their critical thinking when it comes to determining whether we're going to do it or not. But that's not to be said for all the research sites out there, unfortunately.
No, I mean, I remember a study that I was working on, though. This is some years ago, okay? We had a clinical trial site, and I did not do site selection, just so we're clear. I didn't run through my company. We were monitoring. That's what we were sourced to do. We were monitoring and we were handling the outsourcing and all the site contracts and all the payments and all that stuff. So we were just an FSP for that portion. Well, one of the sites that was selected by the previous CRO that we were working with had selected this site in Florida, and my monitor was down there monitoring and found out that the site enrolled a homeless man.
Mhm. No, that happens so often. That happens a lot, especially
And
in psych studies,
this
CNS,
was
where
this was a GI study. It was a hemorrhoid study. So
not
how we
surprising.
how we figured it out was the monitor saw the guy with his koozie, you know, because you had to put the drug because it had to be refrigerated as you were bringing it home, right? So we had little koozies for them.
Mm,
And so my monitor saw the gentleman on a park bench. You know, he was living on the park bench and he had his koozie. And thank God, thank God she went out at that time. And that's how
mhm,
she discovered it, because how would she know that he was homeless? She wouldn't know that because they put
mhm.
in whatever they put down. Nobody's checking those
Oh
addresses
yeah. I
to
used to
make
know
sure.
sites, I used to know sites that went to homeless shelters to recruit patients.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Like in LA, I used to have a site in Orange County, not too far from LA. And I knew sites that would, especially for schizophrenia trials, they would go to homeless shelters, and technically it's an address. It's transitional living, to say the least. I mean, that's like the epitome of transitional living. You're supposed to have,
Mm-hmm.
the rule in research is you're supposed to have an address, but they
Mm-hmm.
don't specify if it's transitional residence. You know, there's a lot of board and cares, then there's assisted livings, then there's sober
Mm-hmm.
livings, and then there's shelters, and
Mm-hmm.
then there's motels. Like I knew
Mm-hmm.
sites also that used to have located along the borders take migrants from the border and put them in motels for studies. So this kind of stuff happens a lot. There's been articles written about it in the past. It's not surprising, and it generally happens around the psychiatric trials.
It's
We
it
have
that
we
it's
have
horrible.
Here in Yuma, we have mostly general medicine, so like 95% of our patients have traditional housing of, a home, an apartment, something like that. Occasionally we'll have like a mobile home people, and then occasionally we'll have people who have like an RV, but
Mm-hmm.
just live whatever parking lot they could find. And those ones, not surprisingly, are the ones that are usually lost to follow up first.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's actually not in your interest as a site to enroll these people.
No.
It's just a lot of wasted momentum and energy and resources allocated towards this transitional living, which we stay away from for the most part. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
they fall through the cracks. Like when you're seeing 5 patients a day, sometimes you'll have someone that's, you know, you can kind of tell they
Mm-hmm.
don't really have stable housing, but they give you an address and you say, okay, well, let's see if you qualify, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
you go from there. But yeah, loss to follow up is not uncommon for this kind of demo.
And again, it goes back to the human. I mean, come on, what are we doing? I mean, we shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
be doing things like this. This is horrific. You
Mm-hmm.
know, that's it's just I can't even I remember somebody asked me one time about prisons. Well, can't we go to
Ah,
no?
someone asked me about that too.
I'm
Uh,
like,
a former employee whose husband worked in the jail asked if we can recruit inmates. And I said, no, let's look at GCP and look at like it specifically says inmates are prohibited from participating in trials. So it is a question that comes up surprisingly a lot.
well, and and that goes to another point, right? And I don't want to turn this into an incarcerated individual discussion, but that's another issue, right? They go into prison and they don't get the same drugs, medicine. I mean, when I
Mm-hmm.
say drugs, because we study drugs, so if somebody understands
Mm-hmm.
what I mean
Mm-hmm.
by drugs, I'm not talking about illegal drugs that you have to take, something to, because you overdose. I'm talking about study drugs, that were approved, so they're medicines. They don't get the same medicine once they're in there. And I know this for a fact. My brother was incarcerated and he had congestive heart failure.
Mm-hmm.
And when he, went in, they had to obviously give him a CHF drugs because, he'll die, fluid.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I remember him because I would go see him and with my dad. And I remember him telling me, Chrissy, they're not giving me what I used to take. Can you make a phone call for me and see if you can help me? And I'm like, yeah, of course I'll make a phone call. I'll go talk to them now. And he's like, you can't just go talk to them now. Chris, can you, do this for me? I was like, of course, so I tried, I called and I'm like, this is not what my brother's taking. I'm a pharmaceutical executive. This is not appropriate. I'm also a patient advocate. This is not,
Yeah.
this is not appropriate. And they're like, well, that's all we have. That's all we can give them. But it's not the same drug.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and unfortunately, there's varying degrees of class systems and the healthcare options afforded to
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
classes in our country. I think that's the dichotomy is pretty big when you actually look at it.
Well, and also when you talk to people, like I was talking to someone yesterday who wants us to invest in them, and they have a really great concept. They really do. Um, However, um, they don't have the actual thing. It's a device. They don't have the device made yet or anything like that, right? And so I said, how much is it going to cost for the patient, right? Because that's one of my things. Like it has to be affordable to the patient, right? I worry about those things. If I'm part of the investment vehicle, I'm going to ask that question, right? And so is my CFO. And the person was like, "Oh, it's going to cost $250 for this thing," and I'm like, and he's like, "And that's really cheap." I'm like, 250, that's cheap. Okay. Well, how much is the competitors thing? Oh, well, that's 5,000. I'm like, wait a minute now. That can't be wholesale. That's got to be, it's not cost. That's a massive markup because this thing should only cost $50 what they're talking about because it's AI centric. And I'm in the AI space I've been in it since 18. So I'm like, what are you talking about? And then he's arguing with me, telling me 250 is cheap. And I'm like, so you think people in Ghana are going to be able to afford $250 for this thing that will last them hopefully for a year if it doesn't break? If it breaks, they got to buy it again because you're not going to give them any kind of warranty because you're going to say they were negligent and they broke it. Not that it broke because it wasn't made properly, right? We know how this works. So I'm like, that's not going to work for us. That is not going to work.
Yeah.
It has to be cheaper. And not only that, the person was like, oh, I go, well, where is it going to be made? Oh, we're going to make it in China. I'm like, and it costs $250? What are you doing that it's costing $250? And by the way, we cannot get this approved in the US because it's a device. We cannot, what, with China? No. What are
Yeah.
you thinking?
No, there's a whole topic here about the pharmacy benefit managers that negotiate prices with the drug companies and throw the insurance companies in it, and that's not the case in other countries. I'm in a
No.
border town with Mexico, and across the border, the pharmacies there say medications 10 times less the price, just because they don't have to deal with their PBMs. There's a different healthcare system there. Not to say that it's better, but ours is certainly not without their flaws too. And these are some of the ones that we're seeing.
Well, and look at all the pharmacies that are shutting down all over the United States.
Yeah,
Pharmacies, Rite Aid. There's
yep,
lots of Rite Aids that have been shutting down. I know because
yep.
we have Rite Aid in Pennsylvania. We had some of the CVS is having problems. We talked
CVS
about
shut down their, I think their
clinical.
research. Yeah, they
Yep.
tried to do research, and I think it was either CVS or Walgreens. One of them still doing it. The other one shut down, but it's only a matter of days before, a matter of
With the
time
other
before
one.
the other one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we should we're getting close to the end of our time. And I promised you we wouldn't go on because, as you could tell, Dan and I could talk forever.
Oh yeah. We'll do more.
We'll do more of these because there's lots of humanitarian issues that keep arising, that come to you, come to me, come to other people that we're connected to. And I think it's important that we discuss these things so that people understand what's going on out there, so they are better educated.
I agree. And it's just super important to shine a light on this stuff, because at the end of the day, these are human beings, and at the end of the day, we're all patients.
Right.
You talked about your personal struggles yourself and with your son, and I mean everyone has a similar story. At the end of the day, this is all of our problems, not just the industry's problem.
We need to come together as a community and really try to do better. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we should be worrying about, is really protecting our human population.
Yeah, but there's a lot of money to be made, so everyone looks at that as someone else's problem, right? That's why it's so important to have podcasts like yours out there to shine a light on this stuff.
And yours too.
Thank you. I get into it a little bit, but not as much as it probably could. And that's why what you're doing is commendable.
Thank you so much. I just kind of got to a point, Dad, like we were talking about before we got on. I was like, that's it. That's enough.
Yeah.
I'm peeling back the onion. That's what I'm doing. I'm just peeling it back.
I make up for it by advocating, because my channel is more educational, informational. I make up for it. I try to, at least one-on-one here at the site, like with each patient.
Yeah.
And I mean, we really do go out of our way to make sure we're treating them right. We take the studies that I would be okay putting my mom in.
Right.
That's like my benchmark, and our
Right.
PIs follow. And as long as we treat our patients fine, we could affect change in our community. But to do this on a global scale requires global initiative.
Yeah, I mean, when I was talking to Darshan about this diversity population issue, it's something that has to be raised above our country. It has to be more of a UN focused initiative, because, it should be all countries coming together, right? We were talking about trials that are running outside of the US and how they run their studies, right?
I don't know if it's the UN. There's a movement happening right now I want to get a part of this year. It's like one of on my list of things I need to do. The decentralized science movement. So it's called a DeSci,
Oh,
DESCI, the
okay.
DeSci movement. And it's kind of like the DeFi with crypto, science, clinical research, um, crowdfunding studies
Okay.
to get drugs approved outside of the current paradigm. And this is
Oh,
just the early days of it. It's not like it's gonna make a difference today or tomorrow, but a decade out, 2 decades out, it could grow just like the crypto movement has grown over the
mm-hmm.
last 2 decades. And it's definitely something to pay attention to. And
I didn't know about that. Thank you
yeah,
for telling me. I'm going to
it's
look
really
into
big
that.
on Twitter. There's a bunch of biotech people, scientists,
Okay.
PhDs trying to do this innovation outside of the academia ecosystem and within its own framework in a way, just like Bitcoin is kind of taking
Mm-hmm.
things off of the traditional banking system into its own hands. This is a
Right.
similar, in that similar vein, as cryptocurrency, but this is for
Hmm.
science.
That's interesting. Well, I'm definitely going to look that up. Thank you for telling me about it
Yeah.
because I wasn't aware of it.
I've been
Um,
aware for like a little over a year, but just it's a lot to grasp and it honestly takes a lot of effort to learn.
mm-hmm.
Just like
Mm-hmm.
crypto took years for me to figure out and still I'm learning, but the
Right.
fundamentals I think I understand enough, but the DeSci stuff I'm just at the beginning, really. And it's a huge rabbit hole of viewers and listeners want to go down. I think it'll be worth their while.
Hmm. Well, thank you for leaving us with that tidbit. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, because I agree with you and Darshan. I don't agree with the UN side, but I agree with something similar to that.
Like
And
international coverage. You
it's
know what I
gonna
mean?
boil down to citizens
Yeah,
doing it.
that that's right. I agree with that. Well, thank you so much for being on with me today, Dan. I truly appreciate, especially since we just came into the new year. We were
Happy New
talking about
Year.
that
Yeah.
earlier. Happy New Year. And thank you again for being on. And I'll have you on again some other time so we could talk about some more fun humanitarian things.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Christina.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our listeners and viewers. Remember, I am Christina D'Arcangelo. Bye-bye for now. Okay. My side.